can start the recording. Is it recording? Can you hear me online? I'm experiencing deja vu. I think we've been here before. At least I have. Case 86 from the Blue Cliff record. Yunmen and the Radiance within. Yunmen asked the assembly, within each and every person is a radiance. Look for it, and it is lost in darkness, dim and faint. What is everybody's radiance? He answered himself, the pantry and the triple gate. And then he also added, a good thing is not as good as nothing. Yunmen was one of the great Zen Chan masters in the Tang Dynasty. He lived from 844 to 949. He was a Dharma heir of Seppo, and who was a Dharma heir of Tokusan. So it's a pretty potent lineage here. And he started the Yunmen school, which is one of the 5 schools of Chan, and it eventually got folded into the Linji school. And it culminated in the compilation of the Blue Cliff record from which this koan is taken. Yunmen was fond of taking a piece of a poem or a sutra or some little folk saying and giving it as a question to his assembly. And then he'd ask for a response, and there was seldom a response, so he'd usually give the answer himself. And because Yunmen was Yunmen, he'd often give more than one answer because he couldn't help himself. So this is one of these situations where he gives 2 answers. question. His first answer is pretty good. What is your radiance? What is your true nature? The pantry and the triple gate. The kitchen, the back door, front door. So with that answer, Yunmen has completely destroyed metaphysics and philosophy. Where is your true self? You practice by going to the place of practice. You show up. You enter by the front door or the back door or the back gate. You bow as you enter the Buddha hall. You take your seat and you be Buddha. You know, if you commit yourself to the Dharma, you don't have to go looking for your true nature. Is there really a method of meditation that we need? If you show up like you're doing here for this retreat, do you need a method when you're sitting on the cushion? You might, from time to time, if your mind is really busy or you have some pernicious emotion that is plaguing you, you might need to resort to counting the breath. But really, in the end, if you're practicing in this way, there is no method. You show up. You take your one seat. And then it takes care of itself. You don't have to go looking for your true nature. It's already here. If you go looking for it, you're probably looking in the wrong place. Well, it's interesting if you just open to what's here and you sit as we're sitting. There is some sense of precision. You can pay attention to details. You can cut vegetables in the kitchen. You can cook. You can paint the fence. You can clean. But there's also this spaciousness here. It's always here. And what's interesting is we have both. If you're driving your car and you're listening to your favorite rock song or music or whatever it is, and you're singing along, you're having a good time, and someone walks out in front of your car, you're going to put your foot on the brake. We're doing both things at the same time. You're singing that song and having a good time, but you still have peripheral vision. You still have awareness of the space around you, even as you are singing that song. And so we have this capacity for both paying attention to details, which are important, and also the space is already here. It's always here. And it's effortless. You can't try to be spacious. So, space has texture. Trungpa used to talk about it as like moving through milk. And we would do these theater exercises where I was in the theater with Trungpa. I don't think I ever had a line to say, I just got to sweep when we did the Heart Sutra. That was my role. I was the sweeper. But we would do these, I don't know what you call them. We would tense a muscle, and you would like take 15 minutes to move from here to there, right? What's that called? You tense your muscle and you kind of move through space slowly. Puto. Isometrics, maybe, yeah. And the idea, what Trungpa was trying to get us to appreciate was that space has texture, that we are moving through space. Especially important if you're doing some kind of performing art. Yeah, to be present. Not necessarily to the audience, but to the situation that you're in, which includes the audience. So, you know, if we're talking about mindfulness, we can talk about methods, one-pointed attention or open awareness, but in our tradition, the Zen tradition, we're really opening to the spaciousness that we're in. The almost like seeing the background. So it's like if you're at the theater, you may pay attention. Obviously, you're going to pay attention to what the players and actors are doing on the stage. But if you have this open awareness practice, or like shikantaza, you're also aware of what's going on behind the stage, the lighting, the sound system, all the things that go into making up the play. So Zen and Dzogchen have the same kind of quality of opening to what's already here, and it's effortless. It doesn't require effort. In fact, if you try to make a method out of it, it gets in the way. As soon as you're creating any kind of reference point, you start to build territory, and then you solidify the space, and it's no longer open and fluid. So, really, all we need to do is show up. Come to the place of practice, and it takes care of itself. We really just show up. Keep sitting, keep going. And the practice takes care of itself. It takes care of you. You take care of it. Take your one seat. You sit down on this one seat for a couple of days without doing anything else. It's right here. How could you possibly miss it? It's so obvious. The only way we miss it is by looking for it, which is a paradox, right? So we might be feeling pretty good by now because we're in retreat. And yeah, I'm the Buddha. And then Yunmen says the second answer, which is even more potent. He says, what's he say? He says, a good thing is not as good as nothing. Just when you thought you had it. Enlightenment is none of your business. We just show up and be ready. And then it's a grace that happens. I don't think this teaching just belongs to us. It doesn't belong to Zen or Buddhism. The people have been trying to find the deepest truth of themselves since the beginning of time, and all kinds of people have done this. They haven't necessarily been Buddhist or even religious. They could be different religious, but people have been trying to find the depth of their own humanity since we've been here. So I think this is a very generous and kind way to live our lives. To align ourselves with the deepest truth that we can find here. And we only have a limited amount of time to do this. So, if you know that, then you will take up this practice because you don't take your life for granted. What we have here, what we've been given, is a great gift. And we're not here forever. So the path shows up when you show up. Put your foot down and find your one seat. It's up to you. That's what you're doing. Nothing's hidden. There's another koan like this from the Mumonkan, case 26, where Joshu asked Nansen, "What is the way?" Nansen answered, "Ordinary mind is the way." And Joshu asked, "Should I direct myself toward it or not?" Reasonable question, right? Nansen says, "If you try to turn toward it, you go against it." And Joshu asked, "If I do not try to turn toward it, how can I know that it is the way?" All reasonable questions. And Nansen says, the way does not belong to knowing or not knowing. Knowing is delusion. Not knowing is a blank consciousness. When you have really reached the true way beyond all doubt, you will find it as vast and boundless as the great empty firmament. How can it be talked about on a level of right and wrong? So don't worry about whether you're enlightened or not, whether you found the way or not. It's already here. Just trust yourself. Trust your own basic sanity and goodness, your good heart, and show up. If you really give yourself the Dharma will give you everything back. It'll give you trees and flowers. mountains, rivers, prairies, oceans, clouds. So it's a common, I think, sort of mistake to be looking, you see that all the, Zen has been co-opted so much, and you see it all the time. Zen is, find your Zen, find your peace, find the quiet place, wherever that is. This place is never quiet. Probably noise, trains. So if you're looking for quiet, you're gonna, be a little disappointed, or peace, because that's situational. That you may have, we can find quiet at maybe early in the morning when we first sit, but so trust the stillness. The stillness is not particularly situational. You can find stillness in activity when you do samu. Stillness is unconditional, like the truth of who you are is unconditional. There's no qualifications needed. So the important point about practice that we learn is to, when you trust the stillness, you trust another kind of intelligence. We call it prajna wisdom. It doesn't confirm or solidify any territory that you try to create. As soon as we reach for a reference point, we're creating territory. We're solidifying the self. It gets in the way. And so we learn through this practice to let go of reference points, to not reach for the shiny object. That's why this is so wonderful. When we do this practice, and we all know what it's like to reach for the shiny object. We're doing it all the time. But when you put yourself in this container of a retreat, you're actually putting yourself on a path where you're not reaching for the shiny object, right? And then if you do this for a couple of days, wow, something starts to emerge, some clarity. So just keep going. There is no method here. And you're already fine and sane. You're already awake. Don't go looking for that. We're really lucky to have this Sangha community and to support each other in this kind of practice. It's really wonderful. It's rare. And to be an Ongo, you think, oh, Ongo, how terrible. It's so much work. The secret of joy is having some discipline in your life. When you actually put yourself on a path of practice, you'll find a lot of joy. Not just happiness, but joy. You'll find the truth of your own, you'll sing your own song. You sing your own heart song. It's what we're all longing for. To be ourselves, to be authentic. So I'll close with this poem by Joy Harjo called Without. The world will keep trudging through time without us. When we lift from the story contest to fly home, We will be as falling stars to those watching from the edge of grief and heartbreak. Maybe then we will see the design of the two-minded creature and know why half the world fights righteously for greedy masters, and the other half is nailing it all back together. Through the smoke of cooking fires, lovers' tryst, and endless human industry, maybe then, beloved rascal, we will find each other again in the timeless weave of breathing. We will sit under the trees in the shadow of the earth's sorrows, watch hyenas, drink rain, and laugh. Any questions? Comments? Stories? Poems? Dreams?
I'll say I had a dream the other night where I had something like in my mouth, like a hair or something. I go to pull it out and it just keeps coming and coming, and I can feel it in my stomach. Like I could feel it. I'm like, oh, it's a long one. And it kept coming out and out and out of my mouth. I was relieved when it was done. It did finish. But this leads me to something kind of like you talk or mention in that poem, just sort of like as you go on, you'll see the people see you as stars or see you there. Like there's some sort of concept we have, right, of like karma or our energy continues or something goes on. And then also the idea of like emptiness where we're just letting go and letting go and letting go. I was wondering, like, do you have something is there some thought or how do you reconcile the two, or how do they marry?
You just stop trying to nail it down. I'm not sure I answered your question. Your question was, is there a thought, is there a concept, something that would help us understand emptiness?
Well, I just feel like they're almost, maybe they're two sides of the coin again, like two sides of the same coin, but that like that karma or that continuing on and that kind of thing with like the idea of like the emptiness.
Well, I think the notion of emptiness is that nothing here is real in the way that we take it to be real. Nothing is unto itself. We're all dependent, and we are all codependent with each other and with everything, and nothing exists unto itself. And so we tend to create suffering when we imagine that something is real, and then we are likely to get attached to it and want it to be here forever, and then we suffer when it's not, whatever that is, whatever it is that we think we need. And so emptiness is what heals suffering, because when you see emptiness is not a bad thing. Actually, emptiness allows everything to be here. Without emptiness, there would be no change. there'd be no growth, there'd be no development. So we all create, we all have karmic seeds that create both suffering and happiness, and it just depends which we learn. Part of wisdom is learning to differentiate what is wholesome and what is not, and then making the further choice to go with what's wholesome and not choose and pick that. You choose that to go with that. So from the relative point of view, we're all always practicing to try to discern what creates suffering in our lives, and to choose, actively choose, intentionally choose to water those seeds of wholesomeness which lead to a better outcome. I think the practice is eminently practical that way. I mean, the Buddha said, the most basic thing the Buddha said, I teach suffering and the cessation of suffering. That was it. It's not some metaphysical religion. It's like, notice how we suffer, and then we can actually address that by understanding how we do that, and we can choose to behave differently. But even good merit is empty. So this is a dream. There's nothing here solid that we can hang on to. I mean, that's the freedom, when you really get that there's nothing here that I can nail down. We want to understand something, and we can't get it that way. The only way we get to this is by letting go, and it's kind of a paradox. You let go by getting out of the way, and then it's here. It's always here. But as long as we're struggling with ourselves, to get it, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot, so to speak. So you learn, I think, on a very organic level about emptiness. It's not a philosophy. You just learn that when you create ground, when you create territory and try to solidify yourself or anything that you're wanting, you're going to create suffering. And you learn to slowly, you learn to trust prajna wisdom, which doesn't create that ground. It cuts through your own kind of bullshit in the way that you can fool yourself or deceive yourself. And then you find that the practice has a lot of guidance, there's a lot of wisdom that we can rely on to help us let go.
Roshi, you said something a while back, I don't know, months, years, but that this practice is like stepping off a cliff but never like taking a plunge, a leap, but never hitting bottom. And and my thoughts on the path itself have sort of been evolving with that, which kind of culminates with what you said this morning. And since you offered poems, it brought back one of my favorite books when I was a young teen, was Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut. And I'm gonna actually buy another copy and reread it now because I think it'd be a lot more meaningful. But he basically, for those of you who haven't read it or haven't read it in a while, he creates his own religion. But within that, the insights are amazing. But the poem that focuses on the act and not the destination is when he writes, "We do, doodly do, doodly do, doodly do, what we must, muddly must, muddly must, muddly must. Doodly do, doodly do, doodly do, doodly do, until we bust, bodily bust, bodily bust, bodily bust. And it's taken on so much more meaning for me now because of this practice, that it's not the destination. It truly is, yeah, that we have to give up the destination and just keep on that path. Yeah. And that gives me great comfort for some really strange reason.
Yeah, I love Kurt Vonnegut. I grew up with him. He's one of my heroes. Yeah.
Oh, golly. It came to mind when you were talking that Buddha was in a sesshin. Was that like 6 days, right? So he sat.
Buddha was in Sesshin?
If I feel like that, you know, when you were talking about,
Yeah, he's in Sesshin now.
yeah, well, yeah, I guess. Yeah. I was just, you know, I was thinking about how this idea of not needing to arrive, or not needing to arrive,
Uh-huh.
and not, if I don't have anything, if I'm not holding on to anything, then I can't lose it.
Right, yeah.
And the loss is what drives me crazy, this idea of, you know, not getting something I want or losing something I have.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting how I will continue to do that to myself. When you talk about this as a proposition of how to live more joyfully, it makes so much sense organically. It's like, yeah. And then 7 seconds later, I just there's a have to in my, I have to. And then that other voice is like, no, you don't. So this is a battle, and it just,
Well, we just have bad habits. That's essentially, I think, what it is that we just have habits of desiring something, or an attachment to something. One of the teachings I'm going to be appreciating during our Ango is the Yogacara, 8 consciousnesses and the 5 Buddha families. And it's a teaching that actually acknowledges emotions as a wisdom, which isn't always the case in spiritual practice. But our emotions can be afflicted. The way that we create suffering through emotions is that we project them. And if you don't project the emotion and you hold and you own it without the projection, you have the emotion as a wisdom. You have the texture of the emotion. We create the suffering around emotions by distracting ourselves from the wisdom of that emotion by projecting it out. And the projection is our way of avoiding actually owning the emotion. And I think with practice, you learn that you don't have to get rid of any of these, what we call negative emotions, like anger, pride, ignorance, greed. You be one with it. That's what we actually say, and when we chant the Gathas, be one with it. Then you have it. Then it's a wisdom. But if you, because it's not dualistic, when you don't project, you're not creating self and other. And it's really kind of the heart of Buddhist teachings, is that we're all creating this separation, this division. And that's what creates suffering, is we divide, we separate. And as soon as we create that dualistic split of self and other, we're in a dualistic framework that is going to create more separation, more division, more suffering. And so you learn to eat the projection. You eat it, you bring it back. You realize that the projection is getting in the way of the relationship with the person that you love or you wanting to communicate with. And so you eat it, you bring it back. And we can learn to do that. And when you don't, I'll talk a lot about this during the ongo. I think it's really an important place of practice that we acknowledge emotions, that sometimes we might think that like having equanimity is to be so at peace that you don't have any emotions, which would be, I guess you'd be dead then. So, but we don't trust emotions. We sort of feel like emotions are irrational and kind of unpredictable. So we try to be whatever we think being objective and balanced is, or dispassionate. But then you kind of, if you kind of push the emotions away, that doesn't work either. So in one way or another, we have to acknowledge emotions as part of our human makeup, and they're part of the spiritual path as well. We don't need to get rid of them. We need to transmute them into wisdom, which is eminent. It's definitely, I think it's what practice is about. The five Buddha families, you transmute anger into clarity. Anger has a way of showing up. When you're angry, you show up with the anger, right? It gets your attention. And if you can learn, and it's very powerful medicine, because what we do when we're angry is we definitely want to project it out and hang it on some poor sentient being. That's what we do. It feels good. We get righteous and all worked up about it. Blame somebody else. So if you take that anger back, if you eat it, which is not what we want to do, but if you do take it back, then that anger can transmute into what we call mirror wisdom. It's so clear. It reflects everything without any bias at all, without any picking and choosing. That's wisdom. That's the wisdom of the Vajra Buddha family. And each of the Buddha families has a wisdom associated with a particular emotion when it's transmuted. This is kind of a Vajrayana teaching that we don't have to avoid emotions. We can actually work with them and transmute them into wisdom. You don't have to think of emotions as negative or positive.
I was going to start by sharing a dream I had the other night too. I was staying at my sister's house, and I was in like this dark room, and I kept hearing like this like ching, and like all this metal kept enclosing me. And then I woke up, and my niece's hamster was rattling the cage. And I also just like a metal bed frames. So I'm not used to that. So I think that's what I was feeling in the dream. But based on your Teisho, the questions coming up for me is, how do I appreciate my life?
Really?
Yeah,
That's a big question.
I know.
You want me to tell you how to appreciate
Just like in one sentence.
appreciate your life? Appreciate your life. That's what my Zumi Roshi said anyway. He said that to me. He said that to all of us. Appreciate your life. Well, don't take it for granted. I think. But first of all, realize that we're here for a short while, and it's like the blink of an eye, and then that gets you on the cushion, I think. And when you do this practice, I think you find a kind of intimacy with yourself, don't you? And that's how we appreciate our lives, as we start to come home to an embodied experience that feels grounded and wholesome, warm, empathic, open, less afraid, more inviting, more curious. What do you think?
Yeah, and sometimes don't feel that way too, yeah.
Well, I mean, we're gonna have hard times in life too, right? We're gonna have challenges, and we have to make a living, and we have families, and we have sufferings, and people get sick, and people die, and there's all kinds of things that happen that are part of our humanity that make up what it means to be a human being, is that we're going to have loss too. So, sometimes we just want to appreciate the flowers, but you can't. The flowers eventually turn into garbage and they smell bad. But it's also part of life, is the bad smells. So one of the ways the Yogacaras talk about the eight consciousness, the last one's called the Alaya conscience, and they call it the store consciousness. And it's from the Yogacara point of view, the Alaya consciousness is what holds our karma. It has all kinds of karmic seeds, both good seeds and bad seeds, good wholesome seeds and unwholesome seeds. And so we can sort of appreciate that we are responsible for our suffering, in a sense, that we create it. And it's up to each of us to find how to, cease doing that. It doesn't mean that we're not going to experience loss or sickness or difficulties. It's the second arrow that is the suffering we're talking about removing. So I'm sure you can think of examples. I can think of many from my own life. When I broke my arm, I fell down in Thatcher Park, and I knew as soon as I hit the ground that something was wrong, because it was really painful, So the first arrow was the pain. The second arrow was fuck. That's the second arrow. What a fucking idiot are you? Why did you do that? That's the second arrow. That's unnecessary. It's just pain. But, it's hard not to shoot the second arrow. But I think with practice, we can learn to maybe not do it for so long. Yeah. I think the key to appreciating our lives is really trusting yourself. And if you trust yourself, I think you find that you want to be still, that you want to be still enough to find yourself. And that's why we do retreats. You're here, I'm sure you're here because this is the way you appreciate your life. If we were just busy all the time, you end up missing yourself. People are busy running away from themselves. And so when you sit and be with yourself long enough, you find, I heard a talk by, who's the guy that did, the Catholic, did meditation. What did he do? What's his name? Huh? Father Keating, yeah. I went over to see him the first time I met him in Honolulu. We were living in Hawaii. And he had been sick for some time, wasn't traveling, so I forget how I got a hold of him, but I went and we had a long conversation, and then he asked me if I wanted to go here and talk about meditation to a Catholic group. I said, well, sure, I want to do that. So I went, and he's very eloquent, but the way he taught meditation was so different than the way we do it. He said, if you want to know somebody, you got to spend time with them, right? If you really want to know somebody, you got to spend some serious time. you gotta put in some time. He says, if you want to get to know God, you gotta spend time with God. That's how he taught meditation. And I thought, oh, this is a beautiful way to teach meditation. It's so relational, and we're so, analytical. Take this posture. Pay attention to your heart and breathe. And it was just relational. And I thought, that's a beautiful way to think about meditation. We're spending time with ourselves, with what's important. And then you find what's important by spending time. You find how to appreciate your life by doing this practice. Yeah. And it's organic. It's not a method. You just notice that when you've been doing this practice, you're more empathic, you're more open, you're more playful, you laugh more. It just happens. And Daigu talks less. I've noticed a tendency.
I do have another question. That's okay. First off, I'm very glad I'm not wearing the lapel mic throughout the entire session. But a question is about the Yogacara. It strikes me as very archetypal from a Jungian standpoint. And I've been trying that the different families seem to be aligned, at least in my preliminary thinking, with the archetypes. For example, the karma family of action is aligned with the warrior. The Padma family with passion is aligned with the lover, and the watcher and the priest is the Vajra family. Has there been any work done on aligning that? Because it just seems to, and then the storehouse, when you mentioned it, it kind of struck me as being like the collective unconscious, that we all have the same seeds, that we share them.
Yeah, it's similar. I haven't read anything that's connected to Jungian, but I could see you making that kind of connection. There's a little danger when you talk about consciousness from the Western perspective, because we start to think of it as almost like something. And there's no sense of consciousness in the Yogacara as having any essence. So the part of the teaching then is that the alaya consciousness is it stores our karmic tendencies, our habits, our good habits and our bad habits. They get stored there, and then it was one of the ways the Yogacara started to be able to talk about rebirth, because the idea was a smell is left over. It's like if you put socks, bad socks that you've worn for 2 months in a drawer, and you leave them there for a year, you open that drawer, it's gonna smell really bad, Well, that's kind of like the alaya consciousness. It kind of leaves a smell. So when we die and we don't no longer have access to our senses and our all of what makes us a human being, we go. The alaya conscious doesn't necessarily go. That something is left over, the scent of our life is left over karmically, and that then has some continuity. But that's not quite the same as Jung's idea of the unconscious and archetype. But I could see it would be interesting to explore that.
It also, I read something recently that said that consciousness was, and I'm rephrasing it, almost an act of cosmic indigestion, that the primitive humans ate magic mushrooms, and that was one of the triggers to help. So our consciousness that we think is so important might in fact have been a byproduct of an accident, of fate. It's just kind of interesting that in the West we put so much, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. No, you ate a mushroom.
Okay, yeah. Generally in Yogacara, as soon as you have a concept, it's kind of considered to be a delusion. But it's not. You get attached to them very quickly. I think the notion of archetypes is they're numinous, right? They're not meant to be, and yet Jungians tend to get very intellectual about all that stuff, and the actual archetype is not a concept, right? It's a numinous, something numinous. It's not, can't really be solidified as such. So maybe that's, anyone online want to ask anything? Okay, maybe we could, it's time for lunch then.
Prepare for lunch.